The greatest thing from Quebec since Celine Dion and GSP.
A pair of siblings.
A couple of stellar young men.
Two brothers.
These two young men. Two siblings. The hard-hitting pair represent Canada.
Welcome to Thinkin Bros. My name's Chris.
And I'm Alex.
We're your favorite corner store philosophers trying to figure out life one conundrum at a time. And today we're going to be talking about the Rosenhan experiment, which was an experiment done by a psychologist or psychiatrist, whatever they called them in the 70s.
Well, those are two different things.
1969. Please, let me finish.
I'm doing the intro.
But before that, I would like to say to everyone, honestly, shalom. Right? That's the thing. Peace be upon you.
And say the other thing we're going to be discussing
That's pretty much the... I mean, like, it feels like I could stop right there just because it's so holistic. But also,
what?
The second thing we're going to be talking about is... I kind of forgot a little bit.
We just listened to it.
Right. The episode of By Very Bad Wizards, and continuing with the trend of, robbing them of their content.
No, but I think this is a new low point. Usually we read the original text they discuss without even looking at the episode, honestly.
That's fair. I think it's very meta. It's going to be like an inception, like podcastception, because they're discussing something.
They're discussing
Tamler's book on honor. And so essentially, okay. Tamler discusses honor in his book, for which he did research. They're discussing him discussing honor. And we're discussing them discussing him discussing honor.
And someone's listening to...
And someone's listening. So if you guys want to do an episode on this episode, it might be the deepest episode of podcastception ever.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. So let's start with the Rosenhan experiment. Maybe... I know you like summarizing, right? So maybe you can start.
Well, I do it instinctively, and you don't, so...
It didn't have to get personal. We can just keep on going with the episode.
So the Rosenhan experiment is... Rosenhan was a psychiatrist, but it's part of the anti-psychiatry movement in... Correct me if I'm wrong, 1970s?
Which, if he was part of an honor culture, spoiler alert,
okay,
he wouldn't have attacked psychiatry. Fun enough.
Maybe, yeah, or he would have gotten a much more lashback.
Right.
From attacking psychiatry.
Backlash. All good.
What did I say?
Lashback.
We'll
have it on the replay.
You're gonna edit, like, the first podcast you edit with, like, replaying clips, and you put this, which was basically a study. I think a book was written about this, about being sane in insane places, it was called. And basically the experiment was to sort of, criticize or even discredit psychiatric hospitals. And the way they did that is by sending a couple of people, eight people throughout the United States to different psychiatric hospitals and getting normal people or people that are, considered normal by society, that have no diagnosed problems, that have no psychological problems, getting them infiltrated into psychiatric hospital by faking symptoms. So I think all of them did the same thing, right? So they come in, they call the psychiatric hospital and say they're hearing voices.
Yeah, but it's a little bit more interesting than that.
I caught a sentence in there that was interesting. They say the voices say something like hollow or thud.
Empty thud, yeah.
Yeah, empty thud, hollow. And so the summary we read, I guess we read a summary about
by the way, not to interrupt you, but definitely to interrupt you. I like to judge, like, in the sense where it was administered in the first episode, and I can quite confidently say that thing we read was written by a high school student. It really feels like it. Because the way it's presented as well, it's like the step one of learning science. The person says, also I think it's a she. That's also another impression I have. The person says, like, the independent variable was this, the dependent variable was this, and I appreciated the simplicity.
Right.
I actually really
did too. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a 3-page PDF of it, like, in an Italian journal summarizing the Rosenhan experiment. That's what we read.
Even if it's an Italian journal and it's a translation, I don't see why the word "all" should have only one L.
Yeah, the big mistakes there were,
and there was
that's
another
why
one.
I thought, like, high school students. Like, there was a plural that. In any case, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so they got 8 sane people to infiltrate psychiatric hospitals by saying they were hearing voices, and the voices were saying hollow, thud, empty. And what they say in the article is that they chose those words because those are existential symptoms. So, like, signs of, I don't know, an existential crisis, of feeling empty, feeling they have no purpose or something. And specifically, that those were not in the DSM-2 at the time. So the DSM-2 was the manual used by psychiatrists to, diagnose and categorize illnesses. And I think there was no section on existential, pathology of like that being an actual diagnosable thing that people had to be admitted to psychiatry hospital for.
Right. So they show up to the hospital and, well, actually, they call up and they say they have these symptoms. They go in for, diagnosis and to be admitted. And the only thing they present, that's the only symptom they present, is not even really a recognized symptom for schizophrenia, which is what they're going to be admitted for as a majority.
Soon after, yeah. And well, they're admitted. I mean, the initial part, I think, is not so problematic for the psychiatric hospitals, I guess, because it sort of is, though.
I read a response article to Rosenhan critiques, and what the guy, it was an Indian journal. What the guy said was that the person who rewrote the DSM, I think Spitzer or something like that, the person that in charge of the DSM at the time, who wrote the DSM-3, had in mind, and this is something that person didn't admit to, but his wife and colleagues did, that in rewriting DSM-3, a question he asked himself was, would Rosenhan's pseudo patients get past this test?
Which, as we'll find out, is a good criterion.
But absolutely. Yeah.
And well, they got admitted with a diagnosis for schizophrenia. And as soon as they got into the psychiatric hospitals, they stopped faking symptoms. And they didn't act like they desperately wanted to get out. They didn't act in any manner that would suggest they have a mental illness. They were just like, okay, I'm. As soon as they got in, they stopped exhibiting those symptoms, or they weren't exhibiting those symptoms, so they stopped saying they exhibited those symptoms, and they acted totally normally.
Although normality is really subjective, but
sure,
okay.
They acted in a culturally appropriate way at the time. They got medication from the psychiatric hospital, and they always flushed it in the toilet.
2,200 pills for 8 patients.
Yeah,
for an average stay of 19 days.
Yeah, pretty crazy. And the article we read said that number of pills and only 2 were swallowed. That was like a weird.
Even
detail.
it was funny, but even that's worrying, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what could it do to a normal person, right? But I mean, if they're giving it at that rate, I think I did I divided it for my blog. I think it's 160 per average. No, it's much more than
per
that.
day. You're saying
360,
not per person.
360. Let's do the math. 2,200 by 8. Yeah, 260, right?
Let's call it an even 10 divided by. But wait, 260 for what?
260 per average patient per stay.
2,600.
260 pills for an average patient.
I'm not going to do the math.
Okay, I can tell you that it's kind of that.
Okay.
It's a little bit more. So
okay,
yeah.
As we said, then they stopped. Saying they had symptoms. They were.
Yeah, the voices stopped the day they were admitted.
Yeah, and they acted completely as they would, in their everyday life. They tried to interact with the doctors there, as we'll talk about later. And it took an average of 19 days for them to get released. So, they stayed there for a bit less than 3 weeks on average. And the longest stay was 53 days.
Yeah.
53 days with a totally, sane person in a psychiatric hospital. Anything to say about that?
I mean, my biggest thing is usually a study with 8 people in science, the problem it would encounter is that, statistical validity is reached when the sample size is at 30, right? At the very least. Now, with 8 people, might as well call it 8 case studies.
Right.
Right? But the thing that is extremely worrying is that even when you take 1,000 people, and let's say give them Advil, the variability in how it affects them is going to be enormous. And there's a good chance you could prove that like Advil doesn't have statistically significant effects. Something that is extremely accepted to actually work and works. Now, for 8 people to come in with one symptom that isn't even in the DSM, and there was no mention of failed integrations of pseudo patients. Like 8 people wanted to be admitted, and 8 people were admitted. That is insane to me a little bit.
Well, at the same time, the getting admitted part, I feel like if you want to get admitted to the psychiatric hospital, either you're insane and you need the help and you want to get admitted, Or if you're sane and you want to get admitted, then that means you're insane. You know what I'm saying? Like if someone wants to get admitted into a hospital, into a psychiatric hospital, I guess they should be allowed to.
Okay, but well, there are legal implications, and I don't want to like get into the nitty gritty, but it's also like, imagine you need an insane plea for a crime you did.
Right.
You go in, you say, oh, you know, I hear voices that tell me bad things. Okay, you're a patient now.
Right. But
and also it's resource management, right? Like, okay, I have these patients with schizophrenia who, you know, have epileptic seizures and hear voices that tell them to do bad things, and they've done bad things. I have all these confirmations that they're actually sick, and then another one comes in with like random words being heard, vocal hallucinations, which could be due to, you know, some episodes or not necessarily schizophrenia, and now they get admitted. I mean, it seems as though, if nothing else, it's just bad hospital resource management.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can see, like, imagine someone like commits a murder and then instantly does what the Rosenhan people did and just gets admitted to the hospital.
Yes.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's what people do sometimes, right? If I take my judgment completely from the movies I watch, some people just like get an insane plea when they're not insane, and
they study up their DSM. They know, like,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, this I have to have 5 out of 8 symptoms, and therefore I will fail.
And it's hard for the other side to argue against it, right? The way you verify it is by getting experts involved and getting, you know, probably psychiatrists to diagnose the person. Yeah, but I think beyond just the criteria being really bad, what I wanted to talk about was, one, yeah, I feel like it's such like an adventurous psychology experiment that is so lacking today. I feel like it's a matter of like Kuhn's ideas about scientific revolution, right? Right now we're in a normal science period where I need to explain it if I talk about it.
Yeah, but look, for me, it's not necessarily the wild experiments, because I feel like those would happen anyway, and we probably hear about them. For me, the problem is ethics committees, right? Like, when I was doing my research in administering light shock with a machine that probably can't even go to a point where they can damage tissue, we needed to wait like 3 months for an ethics committee approval and paperwork and blah blah blah. You know, in the 1970s, when there were no restrictions on such a thing, now yes, of course, to get an advance on what you're maybe gonna say, we're in the pre-scientific stage where there wasn't one paradigm that's accepted, and not everyone has to stick to it like we do today, where we have to, you know, operate in the boundaries of what we now call science. Wild things could happen. But the thing is, you know, every psychology student is like, no, that's so horrible. Like Stanford prison experiment, Skinner's dogs, rats in cages, and blah, 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 and hurting animals, and blah, blah. But we're all quoting it, and we're all being like, oh, yes, operant conditioning. Oh, yes, classical conditioning. Like, everyone, I don't know, every great discovery was made without limitations. It's unfortunate to say. And even when people thought that genetics were everything, then there's the Stanford prison experiment where, you know, people were randomly assigned as guards and prisoners, and then the guards exhibited more and more extreme behavior towards the prisoners, and it was inhumane and whatever. And that showed that the strength of a situation could overtake genetics. Right, like, that's how revolutions happen, when you operate outside of the paradigm. And today, it doesn't even mean to, you know, pursue, like, if I wanted to be a revolutionary, it wouldn't be to, you know, clandestinely pursue qualitative psychology. Like, I'd have to do horrible things to revolutionize something.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, you're talking about ethics as if it's
limiting.
Like, oh, well, it is limiting for sure. I mean, that's undeniable, but it's about the
human rights and whatnot.
The normative claim you put to it is like about if it's right or wrong. You know, it's limiting for sure, but I think we should still have ethics committees and tighter restrictions than what they had at the time, probably. But well, anyway, I guess I don't know what your claim is, so I don't know what I can say I agree or disagree with you about. But
realistically, yeah, they have to be there, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying that, you know, there's AI, so we're going to advance, but we're not, like, if we are wrong in the current paradigm of science, it's going to take much longer to prove that, because, you know, back in the day, back in the day when you could just be an inventor.
Yeah,
You could just stay at home and just like be like, you know what? I'm gonna, I don't know, discover electricity, and that's how you make these days.
Yeah, okay.
Everything you can trace back how everything is funded. You can trace back what ethics committee and whatever. You can trace back. Oh, if these reviewers don't like, if these referees during the peer process review don't like you, you're never gonna see the light of day. Like, it's so normalized and so, contained, and we're so sensible to divergences from it that I believe that, it's almost impossible to change the current paradigm. And so if it's wrong, we're just digging a hole and we're never going to get out of it.
Okay, first
Again,
of all,
am I proposing solutions like abolish ethics committees? No, you have to understand.
I feel like you're idealizing the inventors at the same time, or their lives, like as if back then there weren't like set roles, like people were farmers and priests and whatever, just like so doesn't know history, and they had those set roles, and those inventors were
dinosaur hunters
and dinosaur, gatherers, and those people still like Leonardo da Vinci, by working on a flying machine, was probably still like a heretic somewhat, or like doing things that like his mother didn't approve of because she wanted him to have a stable life or something.
Yeah, and look, the other thing is, obviously, you only hear about the good, or you only hear about the extreme. You may hear about the bad, but of course, when we're in the context of psychological studies, they're gonna tell us about the good stuff that came out of it. Or if they tell us the bad, they're gonna be like, oh my god, this is horrible, and like it goes against every human right, blah blah. But look at this discovery it made, and we couldn't have done it without it, because you had to subject people to horrible circumstances to even squeeze this out of human nature.
Sure. Well, okay, like, not talking about all the other experiments, I think with the Rosenhan experiment, like, the ethical worries, that's what they say in the article. Well, the doctors were deceived, which is obviously unethical. Like, that's the point of the experiment, one, and two.
High school student mentality, I think, but yeah.
And number two is, like, that's their professional job to not be deceived by, well, I guess it's not their specific aim to not be deceived. Their specific aim is like...
But I mean, to a certain extent it is, right? The legal matters, right? If you can claim insanity, well, it's definitely his job to be
if
like...
you're going to be brought up into court and sort of influence the future of someone's life and decide a case, because you're an expert. I don't know if that's how it worked back then. That's sort of your job too, to be able to distinguish between them. And, well, obviously there's no other way the Rosenhan experiment could have been done. They had to deceive the doctors, otherwise the experiment wouldn't have taken place. And the degree to which it's unethical, I think, is very low. And I don't know what the norms would be to make it ethical. Maybe like, oh, you need to debrief after the experiment and tell the doctors like, oh, these were fake guys.
No, for me, it's really the resource allocation. For me, it's ultimately what it comes down to. It's like you can take, I don't know, the 15 minutes that it took to fool the doctor, that's fine. But if you're wasting hospital resources and making it so 5 actual crazy people are still out there because of you guys, that kind of sucks.
At the same time, I agree with you. At the same time, it doesn't seem like they were using many resources for them. There
especially attentional resources.
Exactly, there are tables in there, and it's weird. It's weird the way this article was set up. They talk about like the alternative, the control experiment they did for the Rosenhan study, which was just so within the Rosenhan experiments where they were inside the psychiatric hospitals, they had the pseudo patients come up to staff and nurses, doctors and nurses, or just staff in general, and ask them questions. Do you remember what the questions were? It's like,
when am I getting discharged, or like, when is the committee gonna hear me out?
Yeah, exactly. When is my meeting or whatever? And something like 90% either looked away or just didn't engage with them. They walked by, didn't engage with them at all. And like 5% or something stopped and talked with the people. So largely they were just getting ignored. And then the control study was done. Where was it done?
Yeah, in some university. Yeah. So basically his version of a control or like placebo is asking questions of people, like him, Rosenhan, walking up to people and asking them questions just to be able to use it as a comparative measure for how the people in the hospitals were being treated. And I feel like that's just such a rudimentary understanding of what a control is.
Look, people, when you talk to them, stop, and in psychiatric hospital they don't. But at the same time, you have to have a control. Like you understand, like for the scientific thing.
No, I understand. It's also, I don't know, we didn't see the sample size of it, but it makes sense to be like, okay, look at how 5% of people are paying attention to these people. Well, what if I walk up to someone in the street and ask them a question? If I discover that 10% of people pay attention to me, then that's not that worrying that 5% pay attention in hospitals. But if it's 80%, which it was, right? Around 80%, then 5% is kind of worrying.
But you're not, at the same time, you're not only changing one variable. You're not,
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're not walking up to people in university and asking them, when am I going to get my hearing? When am I getting out? It's not the same thing. If you walked up to staff as a pseudo patient and asked, in how much time is there before lunch, then maybe they would have paid attention to you and treated you better. But if the question you're asking is a question they keep hearing over and over again from people that, actually should be in psychiatric hospitals, and I don't think it's fair to just assess, to generalize to the conditions of psychiatric hospitals in general, just from that question specifically. You know what I'm saying?
Certainly, but as you said earlier, he did something rather than nothing for control. So whatever, right? Whatever. Now, I think the most worrying thing, and this is, I think society is cyclical, and I think old patterns just repeat themselves in more sophisticated ways. If we were to consider the modern version, I'll just say what it is, and then we'll talk about what I'm referring to as a study. Criminal accusations. Okay, and this is, in this study, what it was represented as is healthy person behavior interpreted as illness because of confirmation bias. So essentially, in this study, once the diagnosis was confirmed, behavior such as waiting 30 minutes before lunch in front of the cafeteria was attributed to oral acquisitive syndrome. And this is something I think a psychiatrist explained to his resident students when they were observing the pseudo patients outside of the cafeteria. So that's worrying. Another thing was these pseudo patients had to take notes, quite extensive notes, by the way, like percentage of time spent of the day with patients is, you gotta record your stuff.
Yeah.
And their writing behavior, so just the fact they were constantly writing and taking notes, was attributed to their mental illness.
Was it? I only remember the passage where they say, like, in the beginning they had to disguise. They thought they would have to disguise it, but then it was seen as normal.
It wasn't seen.
They weren't suspected of anything more.
Exactly. It just was revealed to not be as suspicious as they first thought. Right. By the way, speaking of suspicion, 30 out of 120 patients suspected that they were fake, and one of them even expressed it vocally and said, "You're a journalist. You're inspecting the hospital," and still the patient who was held for the longest was like 52 or 53 days. Now, also, another interesting fact that we didn't say is the way this is approached in the thing we read is funny, but this is done across. Like, these 8 patients went to 8 different hospitals across America. Poor and rich, shabby and new.
Well-staffed and not
well-staffed. And not well-staffed. Private and public. So,
yeah.
If this were done with a sample size of 30, however much more that would have brought to the study, although heavily unethical, I think it would have been, to be fair, it was an extremely destructive thing for psychiatry at the time, by the way. Like, this was the leading thing of the anti-psychiatry movement. It has 4,400 citations on NCBI or whatever. So, which is essentially, Dwayne The Rock Johnson status in the psycho. No, I'm just kidding. But so it was destructive. So my thing was, and let me bounce these ideas off of you. The modern version of that is when you get accused of something. Let's say someone just, hates you for some reason and they can't do much against you. They can accuse you of something. And now every behavior, every new behavior, every past behavior will be analyzed with this confirmation bias of, okay, well, yeah, if this guy is accused of being guilty of this thing, well, then obviously this relates to his behavior of that. And it's almost, we're reading Mary Estelle. She says that, anyway, it's a text on marriage and in the 1700s of, how women are represented in marriage. But the main thing she says is, you shouldn't only be able to prove that you're not cheating on your husband. You should be so virtuous as to never be suspected of it. And this is almost how you should act these days with psychiatry, with the legal system, with maybe cheating even. It's due to the strength of confirmation bias. Once you're suspected of something, or if someone wants you to be in a certain position where you are suspected of something, not that you're done, but you should have retroactively been so like holier
than thou.
I wanted to say holier than thou, but that's not what that means. Like you should have been so holy and so irreproachable that not only did you not exhibit those behaviors, but you could never even be suspected to have exhibited those behaviors. So look, let's say I do I'm accused of a violent crime in the future. All the podcast clips where I raise my voice at you will be interpreted as displays of violence.
Right.
So it's not only you can't do the thing, you can't even do the things that indicate that you might be someone who would do the thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing today.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say, just like, you're attributing it to today. Maybe that's all that's left. You know, that worry you have is about confirmation bias, and it's ever present. You know, it's like women getting accused of being witches, and then everything is confirmation about, yeah, they're a witch. Now we've decided.
Yeah, but if they don't sink, they're obviously a witch, though.
Right. If they float, they're a witch.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of that part kind of makes sense. So let's get
Just
back to the actual
in terms of science and gravity.
In terms of science, yeah.
Right. So I think it's an ever-present problem with humans.
Did they do RCTs on witches? Sorry, continue.
A witch actually invented RCTs and disproved the sinking theory.
Paradigm shift.
Theory, there was a paradigm shift, and now okay. But yeah, definitely. And maybe it's it's more present problem that you're sensing because of social media. There's a lot of content, a lot of actual material for people to analyze, whereas back in the day it was just hearsay, just what people said about you. And it's much easier online to create a sort of false idea about who a person is, and in my opinion, to hate a person. It's much easier. I feel like a lot of people, you know, create these ideas in their heads about people online that are completely false, first of all, because they're within, you know, their bubble that hates that specific person, let's say, and they have confirmation bias, and every little thing that person does is interpreted as hating. First of all, the idea they have of that person is false. And second, that's not at all the idea they would have of the person if they just met and talked in real life. Like, I feel like it's so much easier, and there's a sort of a lower threshold for people to hate people online just because they don't have the same opinion or something. Whereas if you cross that person in the street, you would treat them with all the, you know, the dignity that you would treat anyone, and you would probably get a good impression of the person, because mostly people, you know, act civilly, in a civil manner.
Yeah, I think it's part of the culture of only what I call the juice, right? You don't want the
say that once more, just clearly.
No, it was pretty clear the first time.
Okay, the juice.
Yeah, the juice, and it's about not wanting to, you know, go through the trouble of peeling the orange and, you know, chewing and whatever. You want the orange juice, right? You want the sweet part, you want the flavor-filled part, and you want to pour it in a glass and drink it. And this is what we do as humans. The more our science allows us to do this, the more we just squeeze out the juice, get the hedonistic, I think I call it hedonistic filtration. You take out all the difficulties associated with it and you get the juice, right? So this is what talking online is, right? Oh, I don't need to, you know, pay a carrier pigeon and wait for 2 weeks and, you know, learn calligraphy and write a beautiful letter and infuse it with emotion and care and craft my words carefully. I can just text you an abbreviation of what I mean, like GM, right? Good morning. That, you know, that
For the record, you don't text me that. So, and thank God.
Oh, okay. Well, then.
Well, I didn't get it this morning.
Well, then my cell phone has been bugging for the last 3 years. And that means so much less, right? And we definitely perceive this, right? We get tired of the things quickly. Things that are beautiful, that should be beautiful, don't fill us with that passion. And this is the thing, when you infuse a letter with care, right? Like in Romeo and Juliet, all these romances and hiding and you know, the family difficulties and showing up at the bottom of a balcony, it has nothing to do with like the modern day swiping on Tinder and being like, hey, what's up? You want to get coffee tomorrow, right? Like,
Yeah.
there was no passion anymore, right? There was no peeling of the orange. There's no chewing. And okay, well, that was a small
You're
rant.
hungry. You haven't presented a new theory in like 10 episodes.
True, I am hungry, but it's not a new theory. Yeah, I wrote about this like 4 months ago, but if you read my blog. But what I want to say with this is we bypass the difficulty of discovering a person and seeing the good and the bad and actually having a meaningful interaction with them. So we get this juice, right? These clips taken out of context indeed, and that paint any picture you would want, right? Like if every time I interrupted you across these 27 episodes, who knows what's going to happen in a year, right? But just get a compilation of every time I interrupted you. Okay, I'm now someone that interrupts.
Right.
I don't see myself as someone who interrupts people.
Right.
Or even
And I don't see you that way either.
Yeah.
And I'm the one here talking with you.
Yeah, you're the one here.
So who has the more realistic idea? The person that, scrutinizes all the videos because they hate you and want to paint you as that person, or the person currently in the interaction with you that is the one affected by the thing they're talking about.
Yeah, 100%. So all I mean by that is this is an effect of only wanting the juice, right? You get the diabetes. So that's all I have to say. So
okay, yeah.
Now we've kind of strayed, right?
About the Rosenhan thing. What the thoughts that I had was it clearly. I feel like we've been sort of playing devil's advocate sometimes and going against and for the study or whatever. But obviously it's a very important study, and the anti-psychiatry movement was important and led to important improvements in the psychiatric system. But it feels to me like very weird retroactively to see that and think about how all of that was treated. I feel like, well, the way I understand, how psychological disorders are diagnosed and treated, especially personality disorders, let's say obsessive compulsive personality disorder. I think it's sort of, it's a spectrum, and you can be closer to the end where you have obsessive compulsive PD, and closer to the side where you don't have it at all. And I'm someone somewhere on the spectrum, like somewhere in the middle. I don't have like no symptoms, but not enough to get diagnosed. What I'm trying to say is the way that these diagnoses work is like after a certain gravity is reached, and critically after it starts to interfere with your daily life. I think that's the important thing. That's when it's diagnosed, and that's when it becomes a problem. And I guess with the pseudo patients just being in the psychiatric hospital and not having anything interfere with their daily functioning at all, it's weird to have them be diagnosed that way.
100%. But I think this is one of the results of the times, because this was so dramatic a discovery. This is what led to today's there are 8 symptoms exhibited during this disease. You have to have 5 at the very least, and it has to impede on your daily function. Like, all of the rationality of that was only concluded because of such monstrous things happening in the past. So it feels natural. I don't think how wild you described that it feels to you that one symptom that wasn't even in the DSM was enough to admit someone and give them 260 pills on average during their stay without them exhibiting symptoms after being admitted. All of that is only the motivation for which today we can sit here and say, well, that was crazy.
Right. Yeah, I think good for the anti-psychiatry movement, but also speaks volumes about confirmation bias. It's pretty crazy, and it just speaks to how powerful it is.
So yeah, another thing we didn't mention, it was a 2-part study, and the second part, they told psychiatrists about the first experiment. So they were open, they informed them about the details, and then said that they would send pseudo patients to their hospital, and that they would have to rate the likelihood that
any given patient
was a pseudo patient. But again, this was deception, and they weren't actually going to send these pseudo patients.
Yeah.
So whatever number these doctors were going to rate to be fake patients, above 0 was going to make them, appear wrong, which is, I found that less convincing, but just to say the figures, 23 out of 193 patients admitted during the period where the study was done were considered pseudo patients by...
We're suspected to be pseudo patients. Right?
Well, we're strongly suspected to be pseudo patients by a psychiatrist. So, and there was also consistency because 19 of the 23 were suspected by a psychiatrist and another staff member. So essentially 10%. Now, when I read that, I was like, well, maybe that's also the rate at which actually people that weren't sick showed up there and being admitted.
Okay, I see.
Wouldn't you say? It's a realistic. Well, for the 1970s, it's a realistic percentage.
Why would people show up to psychiatric hospitals to be admitted?
Well, again, man, but like environment is huge, and if they are having an episode of high stress, they might think they have a general anxiety disorder. And in those moments, like if you don't have these strict criteria of for the last 3 months, how have you felt? Have these episodes ever happened in the past? And without the proper medication that could calm down an acute episode, what else are they gonna do but get admitted? If they wake up with cold sweats in the middle of the night and they can't concentrate on anything and they can't work, their function is impaired, but all it was like the initial stress of getting a new job or something. Like, what are you gonna do?
Now they're gonna go see a psychologist, but before, I don't know.
Yeah, so okay, as for practical consequences, I mean, don't go into psychology. It's a dead field, obviously.
That's like no matter what we talk about, that's your conclusion at the end about everything.
Might as well pre-record it and just stick it at the end, like as a pre-recording.
And just you just do this to the.
So yeah, confirmation bias.
I think that's the main thing. Yeah, like obviously good for anti-psychiatry. I think it's obvious and huge, but to me, what resonates is the confirmation bias and how we need to pay attention to that in real life and really, have a devil's advocate in your head at all times, doubting what you currently think.
Yeah, I call it the courtroom of the mind. You have to be the judge, and you have to have these defense attorneys. Like, you have to consider all the facts in a cold-hearted manner, where the facts are the facts, and just be little scientists in your mind. Like, if you were in front of an ethics committee and referees and independent peer review participants, would this slide, or did you just hear it from a video?
For me, the way I do it is literally imagine you are the other side. Like, your interests are weighed against whatever biases might lead you to your conclusion. And to me, that's pretty easy. I can imagine being like that human and having those interests and arguing the best I can for the other side. And after that, you've considered the best arguments for both sides, and you can think clearly too.
Yeah, for me, it's easier because I'm usually right in that sense.
So what's the next?
So the next segment is the episode 139 of Very Bad Wizards, correct? It was on honor. It was a little bit of a summary episode of Tamler Sommers' book, Why Honor Matters, and it went into some interesting things. Let me pull up my notes. So in honor cultures, which I pictured in my head when I had to think about those, it was South America.
Okay, I pictured like the American Midwest.
Interesting. Okay.
Whoa, they are partner.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that because I don't feel as though they have a strong sense of community. I mean, stereotypically, it seems as though they might have a strong hate of out-group, but have you ever said, that's my cowboy friend, and you're not going to insult him? Like,
Well, I can imagine a bar fight starting just because someone insulted someone.
Yeah, because like they're drinking buddies. That seems like the deepest link they can share, no?
You're reducing... Anyway, well, the concrete example they do give is Algeria with Zinedine Zidane.
Yes, yeah. And then there are dignity cultures, which is more the North American type. Okay, we agree on that. And in dignity cultures, identity is kind of a mask that we put on, whereas in honor cultures, identity is specifically your role in the group.
Well, I'm not sure if identity is a mask you put on. I think the point was
Well, it's something he said at the beginning. He said that. Yeah.
it's a mask you put on. Because what I got from it was in dignity cultures. It's basically very individualistic cultures where your sense of identity doesn't depend on other people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you put on a mask for your identity. It's just, well, yeah, it's not clear how you look for your identity and what your role in the world is, honestly. As you know, they comment on the fact that in dignity cultures, the ideal is sort of like go on a trip somewhere in India and alone and look for your identity, look for who you are. And it's not clear what that even means at all.
I was really happy when they said that, because it is the archetype of everything I hate, right? Like, let me go self-discover myself in Bali. And Dave actually says something.
Pop quiz, where's Bali? You carry on. Dave says
like off, like to the right of South America. It's like an island or something.
We'll fact check that.
Okay, we'll check it. So Dave says, as though there is a reservoir of identities somewhere out there in India near the
and
beach.
you're looking for it.
Yeah, you're just like going there and looking for it. And that is exactly how I feel, right? Those students going abroad and like discovering the other countries and like partying abroad is quite comical. But again, a radical change in environment definitely gives you some good information about yourself, because what remains constant, right? You go to that other country, you get a new job, you get new friends. What remains constant? And that kind of answers, because, one thing you understand from psychology is that we like to think that identity comes first and then behavior, right? It's like, I know I must do this, and therefore I will act ethically. It's quite often, if not more often, the opposite, right? That's what cognitive dissonance is. You do something and you're like, oh, right, I don't care that much about stealing because I just stole there. Oh, I don't care that much about cheating because I helped my friend. Like, you discover yourself through your actions. Ultimately.
This is, I think what I'm about to say is only for Chris, but this is actually like the larger thing with Piaget is his, like the current of thought he follows is constructivism. Is that, he talked a lot about development, but he said that's actually the way we learn, have a sense of identity, believe the things we believe, is that we act something out. Like the babies learn, I don't know, by doing first. And we saw a lot of that in child development.
They can only learn 3D rotation
if they themselves can sit and hold and manipulate an object. But that's how values are formed, and that's how everything is formed from the bottom up, actually. That's why there's a lot of cognitive dissonance when you have someone else's idea, which you haven't acted out, that comes into your mind, and some ideology, like hedonism or deontology or something, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to you, but it's not you because you haven't acted it out. Anyway,
yeah, that's just so I'm sure cognitive dissonance is clear to everyone. Essentially, if you categorically oppose stealing, and then you're put in a situation where you either have to steal, and the smaller the reward for it, the larger the cognitive dissonance will be, right? So if I motivate you to steal, I say, hey, go steal me that apple from that merchant. I'll give you $1,000. You're like, the cost benefit of
there's not a lot of
impeding on your morality. It is not that large.
You can justify it. I'm receiving $1,000. That's why I'm doing it.
Exactly. But if I negotiated down to $1 and I just give you $1 for stealing an apple for me, the cognitive dissonance will be much larger, where you'll say, well, I did it with so little motivation. Maybe I am for stealing things, right? So yeah, that's what cognitive dissonance is. And we're not going to have a long talk of honor. It could precede our conversation, our eventual conversation on revenge.
We sort of like gave a 2-second introduction and then skipped an honor culture, the way Tamler describes it. First of all, there's a large emphasis on reputation, right, within that community. So your reputation actually matters, and as a result, insults are a big thing. Like you have to defend yourself from insults because your reputation is a very important thing. And they contrasted with dignity cultures where, an insult is sort of irrelevant. It should be rationalized and like oh, what they said is just not true, I shouldn't react to it. That's how I saw it, right? It's like, if you think about it rationally, I'm not what they said I am, and so it doesn't matter, and I should ignore them.
Yes. So, okay, let me introduce this idea of false consciousness. So people from dignity cultures will sometimes say, no, these people cannot be happy. Let's talk about an extreme case of like arranged marriage, right? In cultures where that's accepted and women are raised with the idea that that is the norm. And let's say a Western,
men too.
yeah, of course. But to my point, if a Westerner were to see that and interact with a woman in an arranged marriage and see her being happy, he would accuse her of false consciousness, which is essentially a feeling of, well, you can't be happy with your current identity because it was predetermined for you. And if you actually went out there and searched and knew all the options, you'd be happier. So I think that kind of summarizes the risk and benefit of both. In honor cultures, you have a guide. It is your role in the society, in the group, and it is very constrained, obviously.
Yeah, just quickly, in honor cultures, reputation matters, so insults matter, and your sense of identity is tied to your group, let's say your family or some community you're tightly linked with.
Yes. And Tamler actually says a really good point. Constraints of an art form is often the source of creativity. We know this from psychological literature, which says that the more constrained the criteria for whatever art form you want to do, the more creativity you will have. This works for haikus. I think that's, although the structure itself is unremarkable, when you put such tight constraints on poetry, if you want to call it that, you'll have a lot of things that are kind of, beautiful, considered by some.
Yeah. Well, it's just, you have some...
I didn't let any of my own bias seep through there.
No confirmation bias. You have these...
Not confirmation bias.
Not at all. Have these tight constraints, and so you're forced to explore and imagine, optimize, right? Find the best in those tight conditions that you have. Whereas if you have all the space and all the freedom in the world, you can do anything, and so maybe you do nothing. Yeah,
so if I were to put you in front of an art board, give you every color,
board,
a board for art,
canvas,
and whatever, and give you every color, you'll kind of be lost, right? But if I tell you, here are all the shades of red, I want you to draw me a horse. What's gonna come out of that is likely to be much more unique and inspired and creative because I've put such a constraint on it. And this is, opportunities are infinite. And as Westerners, we see this as a positive point. But ultimately, one of the biggest things is that we get lost. And that's the ultimate thing, right? There is no guide. So if you see this constraint on criteria as a source of creativity and apply it to the self, maybe optimistically, you can see that honor cultures have it figured out much more.
Yeah, well, I think it's always a question of balance between the two, and there are easy examples of how honor cultures go wrong, and easy examples. It's more salient to my mind of interacting with people in our dignity culture, how everyone is just like lost and like I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life. I don't know blah, blah, blah. I think it's a good point that the reason for that is that no one imposes a value structure on you. No one says, look, this is what is important. You should do this. And even as I say this, it sounds wrong to me because it's imposing something on someone. But the alternative sometimes is nihilism, that nothing matters. And we sort of have to figure that out on our own. There's a beauty in being told, look, this is what matters. Okay, you're imposed something. But then when you do it and you do it well, you have a deep, deep feeling of I'm contributing to this world and I'm doing something for the better. Whereas in dignity cultures, if you're just completely free and don't come up with a value structure of your own, you're nihilistic. You're doing nothing. You're doing something for no reason.
Yeah, like imagine waking up like as a Westerner, as so often they do, and in mid-adolescence, you just realize one day like, oh, nothing matters. I don't know what to do, whatever. In honor cultures, you'd wake up, you'd say that, your mom would just be like, what do you mean nothing matters? You have to feed the family. Go work right now. Go.
Yeah.
There would be no depression. I wanted to check the depression rates of honor cultures versus dignity cultures. I forgot, unfortunately. But again, these constraints, although for my entire life, I've been for the blank slate theory of I should discover the world myself. Everything I've been taught, I wish to come up with it myself because that will make it authentic, right? Even though I've been taught for some good lessons in my life, if I can't come up with it myself, and this is my big thing about religion, right? If I was just born in a post-apocalyptic world with no books and no one to teach me about religion, I wouldn't come up with the idea of Christ. And that's literally my biggest problem about it. I would come up with philosophy, which is why I hold it so dear. In any case, I'm sure you and I can agree that when you look at these factors in honor cultures, it just seems so much more respectable. Like, look at what Tamler said was one of the biggest consistencies between honor cultures. In honor cultures, you stand up for yourself, and you're against a third-party interference in whatever, like for revenge or mediation. So this idea at job interviews, you're asked if your colleague did this and this, what would you proceed to do? Look, I always honestly say I would discuss it with them first. Right. And you know how it feels when I'm sure maybe you have an example from movies, but even maybe from real life, when you do something wrong and a colleague reports you directly to the person up above instead of addressing it with you first. Does that ever happen to you?
Probably. I can't bring something to mind.
That feels like the most wrong thing ever.
Yeah.
What you have to realize is this is between me and you, right? Like we're doing the same job, we're trying our best, and if I didn't know something, I'm not worthy of a punishment or even to be, scolded by the person above, because let's solve this between us first, right? That's
what comes to mind is between friends, people at school, when you interact with someone and they don't like it and they don't tell you, and the only way you find out is through your friend who also talked to that person.
That's the worst. Yeah.
And they say, oh yeah, well, that person actually doesn't like you because you did this, and you're like, I had no idea. What do you want me to do? I had no idea.
And that's definitely a lack of respect for the person you're holding back information from, because ultimately, optimistically, everyone wants to just get better. So if you were to inform me, instead of being punished directly and hating you for it and creating the cycle, that could have been solved. And this is what honor cultures have figured out, right? You don't call the police. Right, this is between me and you. I hear this often in rap songs, right? Even though there are gang wars, the ultimate thing you don't do is use police as a weapon against the other gang. It's between me and you, and whatever happens, the police is even the worst enemy.
Right.
So
you're the enemy, but the police is even worse than that.
Yeah, and there's something respectable in that, right? Like I just feel that is respectable.
Solving your own problems, I guess, not depending on someone else. That's why you feel that way.
Yeah, because this has always been between me and you, right? And maybe it's this return to the state of nature where there was no judge, there was no arbiter. And I think that police and everything like that is important for people who can't help themselves. But if you can help yourself, it will be so much more honorable to confront that coworker and say, hey, you don't do this to me, right? You don't do this to me. There's something to it.
That for sure. I think there's another reason, though, for people not confronting people right away, maybe as a side effect of being a dignity culture too. Whenever something, how would I say this? You don't want to say something that makes you seem like you're insulting the person either. I feel like people fear criticizing people because the other person wouldn't take it well. And actually, I think most of the time people don't take criticism well, so it's sort of justified. But the cure to that is just not caring that, they're offended about the criticism, because that what you want what's best for them.
And here's an interesting distinction. Offense versus insults.
Insult,
right?
Yeah.
Like insults are actual things that exist in honor cultures. Essentially, what we have is offense, where reputation isn't even involved.
Oh, right.
And what you said is about not hurting the other person, not about. All of these things are related to insecurities, which is significantly less important than reputation. Upholding reputation and a true insult in an honor culture matters. Zidane, who in the World Cup final playing for Team France. His sister was insulted, and he's a legendary soccer player, or football for all our overseas fans. Legendarily headbutted his opponent and got a red card, and France lost that game. But they say this in the episode. There's a 15-foot statue of the headbutt erected in his honor. I don't know where, probably in Algeria, right?
Well, it was displayed in the Museum of Modern Arts in France for a while, yeah.
In France,
yeah.
For whom he lost the World Cup, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Which is pretty funny. The Sorbonne, I think. But I think it's an important distinction between insult and offense, right? Because what me going up to someone being like, oh, confronting that person, what I wish everyone did, and just saying, what you did there, like, I really didn't like for this reason and this reason. Not attacking the person, once again. Importantly, not attacking the person, saying
but their behavior. Your
behavior was wrong. But people sort of identify with their behavior and instantly get defensive. And that's a problem. But
bad parenting. Shame versus guilt.
Exactly. Emphasize guilt. And that's, them taking offense, which that's all on them. And insult is someone actually going against your person, specifically wanting to cause harm, right? And listen, I'm on the side of Zidane.
So let me circle back to what you just said about Zidane. Now, so for the shame versus guilt thing, it's a part of parenting. Can you remind me what's the good one?
I mean, it's not a part of parenting. It's just the description of the feelings of shame and guilt.
Right, very very early on, by 3 years old, I think you can distinguish behavior of children who feel more guilt or more shame. And
I don't think that's the point. Guilt is associated with a desire to fix the problem that was just that just happened,
and would be instilled in you by using phrases like, "What you've done is bad. Don't do that again."
The behavior,
instead of shame, where it's
shame is
you are a bad boy.
Shame and guilt both refer to sort of regret, self-consciousness about the behavior you just did. Guilt is associated with a desire to fix the problem. Shame is associated with a desire to retreat and hide from parents. And guilt is instilled by attacking the behavior you just did. Shame is instilled by attacking your person. Like, you're a bad boy. Like, you're bad. You shouldn't have done that. No mention of behavior.
So in discussing duels, right,
Yeah.
which is a very honor culture thing, Pinker says, honor, the strange commodity that exists because everyone else thinks it exists. Now, I think that's pretty deep, and Tamler, I think, opposes this as a rudimentary view and like a Western perspective on it. But it doesn't feel unfair at all. That is exactly what it is. We're all playing a game, and the only reason I care about this is because I know that everyone else cares about this. Now, of course, calling it a strange commodity may be insulting and unfair and perhaps condescending, but that is exactly what it is, right? It's like when you're playing a board game and we all want to have fun because we've constrained ourselves to the rules, and then you start stealing from the Monopoly bank because you don't like the fact that you're losing. Well, guess what? The win is going to feel less good as well. So you don't get the good aside from the bad, the juice.
It's a strange... I feel like because we're so detached and we're not an honor culture, it feels unreal. But at the same time, I think it would feel as unreal as our putting, money and status on a pedestal in our society right now would feel alien to someone in another culture where all that stuff doesn't matter, and all that matters is having your family comfortable and not, you know what I'm saying? Like,
which is done through money. That's the thing. That's a tangible thing that is inevitable, and acquiring more of it will increase the commodity level. Whereas honor, if we all refuse to play the game and everyone can just insult them between themselves, what happens? I don't know. Like, internet happens, cyberbullying. Well, okay, what then? It's not something tangible. If you choose, well, okay. This is one of the things that's criticized. One of the logic that is criticized by people who are deep in honor cultures, and I understand that it wouldn't apply for them. But my perspective on insults is where just get over it, right? What is being said about you is either true or false. If it's true, work on the thing. If it's false, ignore the thing. That's just all it is.
The image I have in my head that justifies sort of honor cultures, and I have some honor culture intuitions that I can bring up But it is just that if you take the insult in that way, and not everyone is as rational as you are, and not everyone thinks like you do that it actually doesn't matter, and you tell everyone indirectly that it's okay for you to insult me, I'm just gonna take it. I'm here for you to insult, and you can do it as much as you want. And they have no reason to not do it. Because it doesn't matter, it's not true, and they can say whatever they want to you.
I think that's a preface on our episode on revenge. I would like to get into that for revenge.
Mhm.
But right now, as for honor, it just doesn't seem like that much of a tangible thing. Maybe okay, let me know what you think about transferring this conversation to one of the final topics that interests me, and it's essentially internet cultures. It's dignity cultures that probably have this intuition about how good it feels to be part of a community, which is, by the way, a modern problem because back in the day, 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, when our brains were created, we lived in these small communities, and honor cultures were this default state where, look, you live in a family or a village of like 30 people, and all of these people matter much more to you than the outgroup, and that's how it's gonna be, and there's no way you can take an insult, right? Now, what internet communities do is they again try to get the juice, right? They try to identify themselves with communities online, but they didn't go through the struggles of having the real human conversations, being together through the ups and the downs. They just responded to a few posts about, oh, we have this common interest kind of, and then they mistake this for being a community. And the problem with that, do you want to say something? Yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish your thing, yeah.
So the best problem with that was identified is that young puppies that aren't raised with other dogs can't
regulate their bite strength.
Exactly. So when they engage in play early on in their life, and they bite too hard once, and the other dog squeals, they get the social feedback that is a wrong strength, and therefore they can't really engage in play and like interact with other dogs later on.
Well, no. If they squeal, they have the feedback. If they don't get the squeal, then they never.
I started with young puppies that don't grow up with other dogs, so that's what I meant. Yes. So essentially, if you're not socialized early, you're gonna have trouble socializing. Obviously. Now the thing about that is all these social problems of today's youth and internet communities, and
what are the social problems of today's youth?
Well, the archetype of a gamer who can't talk to the opposite sex, or
that's one of the archetypes from Jung, right?
Yeah, one of the Jung's original archetypes. The
Reddit mod,
the basement dweller. And I mean, look, I can see this all around me with my friends telling me about these things. I can see it when I was part of such communities, and I just heard how they talk. Some people's entire identity is based online. And the reason for that is all of these fake interactions, right? All of this extraction of the juice, all of this, say you wanted to be part of a cause, right? And you choose to join all these communities, all these Reddit communities that confirm your bias, right? Confirm your thinking that is the right thing to do, or that is the best community on earth. And you get all this positive feedback of people just telling you, yes, you should keep thinking like that. Oh, here's an argument for it. You become extreme in your views, blah, blah, blah. Then you go out into the real world, and you kind of have to face the fact that 90% of people aren't going to agree with you. And that's a harsh reality. And the recommendation from the Very Bad Wizards is give people a nibble, right? Like, you got to regulate your bites. So you have to give real people a real nibble before knowing how to socialize. So,
and if they squeal, you stop?
Supposedly, yeah. That's what they said. They argue for. Now, we didn't go extensively into the Zidane story, but a noteworthy thing is that he put his family name above France.
Yeah.
And the way that's described by Dave is that in his history, what came first is his family, then Algeria, or the specific region in Algeria where he's from, and then France because he moved there later. So there was a very clear hierarchy, and probably the people who contributed to his growth as a person were also classified exactly in that hierarchy. So it definitely makes sense to be loyal to that.
And I don't know if they like nitpicked this passage, but you remember that passage that I found wild as they did is like the person says, Zidane's opponent didn't even insult something like his race. They just insulted his sister, which sounded wild to me.
Yes, I think that's a person who is deeply in the, this Americanized, like,
Dignity culture.
yeah, where dignity cultures are just like, hey, we don't have enough problems, and we find this whole honor culture. They're depicted on TV, these gangster shows, these gangster movies of revenge, or I'm never gonna let it go. Your grandfather killed my grandmother. This is gonna go on for ages. All of these things, and we glorify it and whatever. And we know that there's this primitive, not in the bad sense, but like in the original way societies functioned, primitive sense of there is something honorable in this, and we want to get back to it, but we do it so inaptly as to be like, we don't have enough problems. Let's create these like fake in groups and out groups. Let's create these political parties where you can bond over like some flag or some vote, but that's not real. You didn't live with them. You didn't grow up with them. Real communities have the good, the bad, the history, the investment. If you insult my sister, it's over. Like all bets are off. We're fighting.
Yeah, well, the reason it didn't make sense to me is just, let's say Zidane, he's Algerian. He's Algerian, and then he moves to France, pretty early on. He's raised in France. Should his Algerian nationality take precedence over the woman he was raised with and had his whole life to spend with? And you spend your whole life with a person. It's obvious to me that my relationship to you takes precedence over my Canadian citizenship. Like, what does that even mean? That means nothing. There's so much diversity in the Canadian in the country that I have nothing in common with some of these people. And
same geographical region, like it doesn't mean anything.
More in common with some people. More like
that's why I oppose national pride so much.
Yeah,
what did you do? You voted twice during the last 7 years? Like what? You paid taxes because that's the only legal thing to do?
Yeah. And it's just, I don't think I think people want to rationally argue for, but it's an insult against his sister and it doesn't really matter and other things matter more. But in everyone, I feel like there's this sort of intuition of this tribalism, they call it a bit. And it sounds so derogative too, but I'm not ashamed of having a little tribalism for my family, let's say. Like if you do something wrong, and I know you've done something wrong, right? The truth is you've done something wrong, and then someone lashes back at you. Oh, this is why I said lash back. Okay, this is the right way to say it now. Someone lashes back at you, but does it over the top a bit? Even though I know you're wrong, I don't care. Like I stand up for you because their little transgression is amplified because it's against you. I feel like we all have this intuition of at least with your family,
Yeah, when you show up to my doorstep with a body, like I already have places planned to hide it. So
the other way around is more likely, but
I'm gonna cut that off for legal reasons. But and the other thing is, right? You brought the side of a person who's so deep in the dignity cultures that they have a fundamental misunderstanding of the honor culture. But here's the other funny thing that even to us, right, who do live in this dignity culture, is funny of how deep they are in the honor culture. And it's what the guy who got headbutted by the Zidane said in his interviews. So basically he was accused of by some media outlets to have insulted Zidane's mother. And when confronted to the interview, he said, oh no, like I don't regret insulting his sister or whatever, but let me make this very clear. I wouldn't go as far as to insult his mother. Right? So even he had this comprehension that like there are some barriers you don't cross within these honor cultures. And it's funny to hear. Like to Westerner, you'd say, well, mother, sister, whatever, you don't even know them. What do you mean like insult them, get over it, blah, blah. No, but for them, it's like, this exists. This is very tangible. We're gonna put up a statue of you, even if you ruined our chance at a world title, which would have been on Wikipedia and all these glorious things, such as Wikipedia. No, like this is such an honorable thing you did to stand up for your family that we're gonna put up a statue. And that's beautiful. I think.
Yeah. And also to bring some specification, he repeatedly insulted Zidane's family, and it's not like just one throwaway phrase, trash talking during the game. It's repeated, and I think that was what he was aiming at, getting into Zidane's head.
Broke the camel's back, but
straw get demolished.
I've heard it both ways. So
We should bring that back, man.
For sure.
But
Especially I should bring that back.
yeah, you should bring that back. But it's like it makes so much internal sense too, though. Like it does seem ridiculous when you hear that, but at the same time, yeah, his mother is the woman that brought him into the world, and it would be much worse to insult his mother.
There's a respect there, especially like for Algerian, Midwestern. No,
what I was saying was American
Middle East.
Midwest.
That's the thing, right?
Okay.
Middle Eastern, like there's no way you insult someone's mother. That's the end. This relates back to kind of my and Saint Augustine's view on. I wasn't even kidding. The view on happiness.
No, but I mean,
it's
you do this way too often for it to be.
Happiness is the return on investment of like risk, right? So if you want to buy into this honor culture, right? Where, in these dignity cultures, as I said, it's the Jews, it's everything is lowered, everything is inhibited. There's an apathy, there's a social distance between everyone that internet puts us through. If you want to buy into this honor culture where everything matters, there's no good without bad, there's no dark without light, and there's no light without dark specifically. And if you want to have these loving relationships and care and stand up for your family and have these all these beautiful connections and have a sense of community, all of these things, right? Which religion can be related back to that, right? Like you got to go to the church every single Sunday or whatever, or you got to pray these 5 times a day. You have to connect with these people, all of these sacrifices, and you're never going to get the good without the bad. So the way the Very Bad Wizards put it is pretty cool, is that all these critics to what Zidane did don't realize the reason they're invested in the World Cup is cultural
it's a very good
pride.
point. Yeah.
There wouldn't be France versus X if no one cared about this. Like, there's no good. You don't get the juice without the squeeze. You don't get the peel without the peeling, right? You have to get the good with the bad. And if you want to feel this deep relationship with your sister or whatever, like some of my friends from here, right? They call their mom by their name, right? They're like, "Hey, Cindy, bring me water." Like I hear those things, right? You don't get the respect and the love and the proximity without also absolutely having to headbutt that guy in the World Cup final and defend your family honor and blah blah blah, and the duels, right? Even all that makes sense, right?
It makes so much sense intuitively. So I think, okay, I guess the practical point we would bring out of this is being ingrained in a dignity culture. Consider honor cultures and consider the downsides that you're missing out on by ignoring and sort of minimizing and mocking honor cultures too.
And this can all be done gradually, right? If you don't care about your car, for example, and you assign yourself the task of washing it every day and taking it to maintenance at the slightest problem and having its picture as your background, you can cognitive dissonance yourself into caring about that car. And it can make you happy when you see it, because now it's all this return on investment. So all I'm saying is high risk, high reward, and you can choose to put high risk into something and get the high reward. But that's the only way. And I think there's a certain apathy in the West that clashes with that. And people have to wake up to and what a great way to circle back, if that apathy impedes on their life and could be put in the DSM.
Yeah, but also I think it starts with an intuition, though. I think you don't, out of nowhere, cognitive dissonance yourself and force yourself to do something you don't want to do. I think deep down, people have a need or a tendency towards having your family mattering way much more than other things, and you just follow that intuition more than you would right now if you find that's causing you problems.
Very true, but I think the beautiful thing we've revealed maybe in this episode is that it can be a choice. The move can be a choice. If you just by choosing to invest more, and probably starting by the sacrifice, right? Probably starting by sacrificing that time for your car, then you will get the return on it. And maybe if you were to take it to the extreme and like integrate an honor culture, you show up there, they tell you what your role is, you make the sacrifice of giving up that search for identity, and in 5 years, when you actually accomplish that role, you'll be much happier. That's a way to.
But the normal functioning, the way it usually happens, I think, is that you're in
Born
honor
into
cultures.
it.
You know, you're brought up into it, and you don't have that hump to get over of right now being indifferent to like a role within a society or whatever. You don't have that right now. You have to, I guess, sort of ignore your surface level intuition that it doesn't matter and that you can be anything, and just say, okay, this is what matters, and
Yeah, true.
make a choice.
The shift itself costs something more than just being brought up in.
But at the same time, this happens all the time, right? When people, even within dignity cultures, choose careers and choose what they are going to do, they cognitive dissonance themselves into a career. Because when you're an adolescent, young adult, I don't know, you could do anything with your life, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then you choose one thing, and people justify it to themselves. People justify what they're doing right now to themselves very well.
Yes, maybe one of the things we haven't really talked about is the fact that there is no guide in dignity cultures, but I think we've talked about it enough just by contrasting it with the appeal of honor cultures. Right? So figured it out.
3, 2, 1, 8.
Okay, we have to impose on ourselves that next time,
not putting an 8 next time.
You know what? No, I'm gonna say 9.
You're gonna say 9
because
okay.
Look, Rosenhan experiment. There was nothing unclear, and it was a clear anti-psychiatry movement. And for honor, even the thing we weren't brought up with and probably disagree with, things like duels or caring about insults, we've understood them and we've described why they must be understood. And it's why they actually matter.
Yeah, I'm just not clear about the exact place and emphasis we should place on honor culture and how much we should integrate it within our lives.
It's like atheism versus religion, right? Like, it's an alternative choice. Here is the appeal of both. If there was a clear answer, everyone would be that.
Yeah, but you can't be half religious. You can be half honor, half dignity.
You can be half religious. You can go to church every month and like enjoy the connection that you like, the occasional connection you get from it. But
I still feel like it's either you have faith, you believe, or you don't believe.
I feel like that's an extremist view, which is more characteristic of me, but whatever. So 8.5 it is. Thank you for listening. We've been the Thinking Bros, and I have been Chris for now.
We'll see how it goes in the future.
We'll see how that goes in the future. If you want to find out more, go to our website, thinkinbros.com, or contact us at thinkinbros@gmail.com with your lovely feedback. We read every response. And he's been
Alex.
And we'll see you next week.
See ya.